up, buddy, man?
Hey, buddy, what's going on?
Not too much. I'm just marveling in our new review from today.
Are you now? You finally convinced your mom to get a fake username and give us a review?
Well, I'll tell you what, we're going to find out, because I have been inspired by that review, which said,
really?
Hilariously real? Is that what the...
I saw hilarious and I didn't read the rest. All I need to know is that we were funny.
Which surprised me, first of all, that we're funny. Even though I know it and you know it, but, sometimes that doesn't translate.
Yeah, that's true. Like, I had this conversation with my wife. I'm like, I know I'm funny. She just doesn't think I'm funny.
Yeah. Okay. So here's what I'm going to do. I've decided that I would like to get serious about getting some reviews, and I know it's kind of a pain in the neck. But what I'm going to do today is offer the first 5 people who leave a genuine review and then email crushingiron.com to let us know that you did it. I'll give them a free Crushing Iron t-shirt.
Oh, man.
How sweet
You're
is
all
that?
in.
Yeah.
That's a sweet deal. You know who we can blame? We can blame the cloud for this. Because every time you want to go leave a review, you have to re-sign in. And let's be honest, most people don't even know their password. So they're like, I don't remember my password. I'm just going to opt and not review.
I know. I mean, it's totally selling out, but...
That's all right.
It's a nice t-shirt. It's the same brand that Ironman uses for their named shirts, if you ever raced Ironman and bought one of those. And I would say if you want, you can see it. You can go on to Crushing Iron. I have a t-shirt tab up there now, and I have a picture of the shirt. And I will, email them out personally. And I'm gonna, use the slowest mail and the cheapest way, so you'll get it eventually. I mean, maybe
you're gonna mail it out. You're not gonna email it out.
I'm not gonna email the shirt. I will email the design, and you can iron it out. No, I'm not gonna do that to you. It's a sweet shirt. So $25 value, and I think that's a small price to pay for helping a couple brothers out here.
I love it, man. I love it. Good idea.
All right. So you had a good idea for today's topic, and I think it is something that people will be interested in. And basically, did I have this right? We're going to talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly of triathlon.
We are. We definitely are.
Excellent. So, since you have an idea for it, let me start, and then maybe that will trigger something else, because I've been thinking about it a little bit. And if we're going to start with the good, I would have to say, obviously, I mean, some people know my story, but I was 48 at the time, 49 years old, and when I started to run, and then I got into triathlon, and it literally changed my life, because I was in a job that I just couldn't stand being in. It was a 15-year corporate, stint, and running was the beginning, but triathlon was the catalyst. So what it helped me do is it started getting me back in shape, obviously, but it felt better than just running, and it really opened a lot of doors and sort of reminded me of my pure sense of self in the core. And that's how I got started. And of course, that was the beginning. It's sort of this hope phase, that there's new life out there, and there's a new journey that you're excited about following. But with that comes bad, and I'm going to leave that for later. But I would like you to jump in on the good stuff. I mean, that's sort of
I think we can kind of go back and forth, like maybe do a good, a bad, a ugly, and go back around for another good or bad and ugly round, because I think there's a lot, and I don't want to end with the ugly either. So good. Same with me, man. I mean, I don't even think a lot of people know this about me that listen, that know me personally. Is I actually got into triathlon in like 2004 and 2003 to lose weight. I had blown my knees out. I played 1 year collegiate tennis, blew both my knees out, I ended up weighing about 200 and getting to a point where I almost weighed like 230 pounds.
Wow.
Kind of had no like real direction or drive, and struggling in school and struggling to find my way, and just was overall depressed, had anxiety, and just was going through a really difficult time. And I decided I need to kind of change things around, and I need to lose some weight. And a friend of mine had had taken up, an Ironman. And at that point, and this is when it was just not even nearly as explosive as it was a few years ago from a popularity standpoint. And I was like, I can do that. I swam year round growing up. I can do this. And I remember getting in the pool for the first time. I wore like my old school these baggy navy blue swim trunks with cargo pockets.
Nice.
Could I have picked a worse thing to swim in? I mean, not considering I had an extra 60 pounds of fat to carry and was totally out of shape.
That sounds like a drill you might come up with these days.
yeah. Now I suggest those for increased fitness, and back then, I almost drowned, died, and gave up the sport before I started. I remember I got in the pool for the first time and I did a 50, and I was done.
Mm-hmm.
I walked out, and I was like, man, this is gonna be a long road. But I got into it to lose weight. I kind of started shedding weight, and I now weigh about 165 to 175, depending on what time of year it is. But for me, it was a catalyst for, and still is, a healthy lifestyle change. I think I always have over the last 10 to 14 years, I've kind of continuously had a secondary agenda or reason or passion for doing it. But the ultimate one has always been health, to feel good, to stay active, to be driven, to, lead a healthy lifestyle. And coincidentally, it's where my career is headed as well. So it's really had a very positive impact, health standpoint on my life. And
I agree with you. I think that obviously there's way, way more to talk about regarding your evolution, but I think that's the point. I also think it's a natural cycle for most new things. I was really inspired. I was excited about triathlon. It really became a crazy passion for me, but I have an addictive nature. So the early days were really synonymous with the early stages of addiction. I think it gave me a buzz that is one of those things where you try to keep reaching it, and I couldn't. But so this is my bad of the early days. And for me, one of the things was, and I don't know if this is truly bad because there's anything you do about it, but what happens is you kind of get overexcitable, stoked for everything, and then one of the things I regret a little, I mean not much, but I look back and I kind of go, ugh, I kind of cringe about it, because I used to post daily about myself as far as running, social media, kind of I just ran 7 miles today and blah blah blah. This kind of stuff that really, as I look back at it, really proves that in the beginning, and still even now I struggle with it, but it was kind of an ego-driven monster. It was something new for me. It was something that I could prove, my awesomeness with or whatever, and I kind of shoved that out into the streets and into my friends' faces and things of that nature. And eventually, I started writing the blog, Crushing Iron, and I kept posting that stuff on my main feeds and things like that, people that weren't interested in it. But eventually I just stopped doing that. And it's like people know, and it's not, I know that sometimes that can inspire a periphery person, but I didn't want to be in everybody's face about it, because I knew that it was ultimately about me wanting to change, and I was trying to use external fuel, and adulation to get that change. And I think that was the wrong early steps, but I think it's a natural process.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I think, and I see a lot of people, and this, this may not sum up what you were saying. It's ego for all, and then maybe I'll inspire one person, right, instead of sharing my inspiration, and hopefully I can affect all. For me, mine. There was a quote that reminded me this the other day. It was the quote is, "People have a hard time letting go of their suffering. They prefer suffering because it is familiar and is more familiar than the unknown." Mm-hmm. And for me, and I think you alluded to it too, when that time in my life came, which was probably 2010, 11, 12, 13. in the darkest times of my life, like that's where triathlon itself for me came more of a embracing the suffering, and that, people took on this, you just got to endure it.
Mm-hmm.
You just got to, like, and looking back on that, that's no way to live.
No.
It's like, you really just want to like make it through, and you don't, but for me, I was able to turn, the ego part of it, the motivational quote every day. It's like, I think there's a distinct ratio between the amount of motivational quotes a person has and the number of days left before they have like a depressed breakdown. Because I think it's pretty much synonymous with the more you do it, the more closer you are to a breakdown, because you're overcompensating more than usually. But for me, it was just bad. But it gave me, it was in my life, and it's still in my life now for much different reasons. But for me, I just took it as an avenue, and we touched on this in the how to deal with racing and pain. Kind of, and I touched on it then, and it's kind of, I just became a place where I could release some pain in a healthier way, although I was still doing it unhealthy. It's kind of like being in a relationship for 12 years.
Mm-hmm.
You go through the good, you go through the bad. It's like, and at that point for me, it was like the bad, person I shouldn't have. I should have just let go and ditched, but I just couldn't because I was just in a bad place. And I just used the exclusivity of it to, just catapult and try to, erase any shame I may have had in my personal life, or discomfort or emotional stress. And, there's just so many things that, for me, that represents a very bad aspect of how it controlled my mind and even my heart, to an extent of what I needed to get from it in order to continue to do what I was doing.
Yeah, I remember those days. I mean, you were pretty intense, and I really appreciated a lot of your inspiration and the quotes that you would post through social media, and it was really right in my wheelhouse. But that leads me to the ugly of number 3, or like the ugly part of my first sequence here, is that it was obsession for me. So, we had a very small world that was really focused on one goal, more or less. I mean, there was 5 of us or 6 of us training for our first or second Ironman or whatever, and everybody was all in. We were all in, and it was obsessive, and that spilled into my daily life. Like, I literally could not talk about other things. It seemed like, we would, whatever it was, became it all. The conversation always came around to Ironman, and I remember that at work and with people I used to hang out with, and it was almost like I was not listening to the world. I was blinded by the first race that was coming my way, and that was all I could think about. So I just think that I don't want to like come down on us and me for being that, or anybody, because I think that's a natural process. But I think you got to look at it. I mean, with anything new that's exciting to you, I think that most people kind of dive in and they're all in. But for me, looking back on it is one of those things where, like, now I can see it. Not just now. I recognized it a while ago, but it was different, It's almost like, I would imagine, like, old-timers, like, I would go, like, these old school triathletes, I remember, like, conversations with them. They've been doing races for 10 years or 12 years or something like that. And I remember these awkward conversations. I would come in as a new, excited, full of energy and passion for anything and everything triathlon. And I'd start talking to them, and I go, yeah, well, I think, when you breathe to your right and you got the things and the bun, and I start talking about all these tactics I was going to use, and they would look back at me and go, okay. And then that would be the end of the conversation. It was like, they knew I was just full of that early career kind of BS in a way, something like that.
Yeah, I mean, let's be honest. We can come across as some real pricks. That's during our course of probably our ultimate ego, selfish-driven Ironman phase. And that's kind of where I'll go with my ugly. And I think it has I honestly, and I think a lot of I'll take some blame, but I think there's a direct correlation between the decline of the sport of triathlon and how people approached it and their demeanor, and how the sport, instead of the grassroots growing the sport, and I'm a huge fan of inclusive rather than exclusive. And I think triathlon for the 90s and early 2000s was inclusive. Let's grow it. Let's get as many people as we can. Let's do this. Let's do that. And then you look at its peak, which triathlon's peak of participation, racing or non-racing in the U.S. was in 2012. And I directly, you heard it here first, folks. Yeah, seriously, I directly blame that on the year of when social media blew up, which is also what I blame for the decline, because 2015 yielded a steady fourth year in a row of declines in participation, and we're now at a 2007 low. So triathlon participation is trending down, which I think is terrible. But the reason I think it's going that way is because of the mentality that people take up when they take up an Ironman. You become for the most part, and we're all to blame. I'm to blame. I did it too.
I was going to say, that sounds like because of me. That's about when I started. So I basically
it's the Mike Terali effect, 2011. You can mark it on your chart. But in all seriousness, the peak of the sport correlating with social media explosion, where you can share everything that you do, I think it made it a me sport rather than a we sport. And that's why I believe so many people have kind of distanced themselves from either wanting it to be trendy than falling in love with the sport. Because I'll be honest with you, I think a lot of triathletes are completely and utterly absorbed with themselves. And they would rather tell you they're a triathlete than tell you their life story and who they really are and their family. And that's their identity. And they want you to know about it 24/7. And I think that's put off to a lot of people.
Yeah, I agree.
It makes people feel unwelcome. It makes people feel, like, oh, this isn't really a safe place for me to share my story and my struggles. And you're just a triathlete who makes a ton of money and can buy expensive bikes and go expensive places and sign up for expensive races. And that's not what a sport is, and that's kind of why, one of my hopes for this podcast, as I kind of touched on an email earlier this week you were on, was, this is kind of personally, like, this is kind of my grassroots effort to make other people feel that triathlon is not headed to where golf was 10 years ago, where you had to make six figures and be a member of the country club and go out for scotch with your suit on after a training. It's for everyone, and it can really help everyone. And the ugly part of it is that there's so much of an exclusive bravado that so many triathletes have that is just so unwelcoming. And that's my fear for the sport, is that by the time, my son is old enough to even understand what a triathlon is, even though my parents don't even know what one really is. I still have to explain it to him again. Like, what is this again? That he won't have any idea, because the sport will be gone. And that's the ugly part of it that I hope, I hope it turns around.
Yeah. And you're right. And I think that can be intimidating. I think back to getting started and what it felt like, and it did feel like a little bit of this, upper echelon society in some ways. And of course, not everybody was that way, but there's certain elements about it that seem that way. you know, and a lot of that has to do with money and expensive, and I've been there and you haven't, and all that kind of crap. And that's why I say when I look back at it, you know, I've really tried to keep an eye on that and be very welcoming and understanding of people that are just getting involved, and try to be real with them. So I'm going to move on to another good thing, because back to the beginning of when I started, honest to God, I mean, that weekend of my first Ironman was one of the greatest weekends of my life. You know, certainly it had been one of the greatest weekends in the last 10 years preceding that. And a lot of that had to do with, like how you used to talk about it, it was kind of this graduation ceremony of sorts. It was kind of like you're rewarded for all the work you put in during the semester. But it was such a high place. I mean, my family was there, and a lot of my friends were up there, and you were there, and it was one of those times when I really felt like, wow, man, I'm back into my sports life that I loved so much, and I went through something that I never dreamed I could do. And that whole day, every ounce of pain and suffering that I went through, I think it was on the Kona broadcast, and we mentioned this on the Kona podcast, but there was a line in there that said, you know, and you know, that dramatic voice, the guy said, everyone wonders why would you do this? And then they showed a scene from somebody at the finish line just so incredibly joyous and genuinely happy about what they just did, you know, what the accomplishment was. And there's no question in my mind that finishing your first Ironman is like a complete rush. It's a super exciting time, and then just to hang out afterwards with people, friends, family, and stand around and just sort of be there. I talked about it with my brother. I said, man, I something about that, I felt like that was the closest our family had been in many years too. There was sort of this common, you know, connection that brought us together in a different way without the distraction. It was sort of the focus was on my race, but he actually said, oh, really? He said, you felt that? I didn't really feel that. So, again, it was like I was floating on that high, and it was all about me.
You're like, I'm the best brother.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that, and, like, I don't know. I guess that was my mind playing trickery again, and that's, you know, can also probably lead into, like, okay, take a step back, you know. It wasn't all that for everybody else. It was sort of your ego flying across that line, you know, especially in my home state and everything like that. But,
yeah, your state, right?
Yeah, my state.
Yeah, back to the bad again. I kind of like how this is kind of evolving. It kind of how our triathlon life is, you know, evolved. My good now would probably be just overall awareness of the good and of the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Okay.
You know, because it makes me question everything. And if I'm doing it the right way, and, you know, and obviously, like, you know, been a husband for barely over a year. I'm a dad. You know, it's like I sent you that article, and I'll go ahead and name drop old Gordo Byrne. If you don't read his blog, you should.
Say that again.
Gordo Byrne.
Okay.
If you don't read his blog, you should. He's actually the founder of Endurance Corner, a very popular triathlon website and coaching service. But you can go to CoachGordo@wordpress.com and read it. But he wrote a blog earlier this week called "Who Sees My Best Self," and he's a father and has two kids. And it basically the you know, if you're gonna read it, spoiler alert, I'm going to tell you about it. But the good is just the view that I take now on where triathlon sits in my hierarchy of needs and my family's needs. And basically his breakdown was like, who sees my best self? Is it my kids and my wife, or is it in training? You know, do I skip out on the hours of doing this? And does my coach and does my my training partners in my group ride, do they see the best version of me? Because when I go train, I go all in. But when I go home, I'm probably thinking about other things. And for me, that's really been a big struggle, to be honest with you. The last month or two for me, as Hayden has really grown a lot, is like, do I want to take extra time away, and train? Do I want to skip time with him? And how can I find more ways to incorporate Allie and Hayden into what I do on a daily basis, so that I can do stuff together with them, so that they can see the best version of myself, and I'm not just stealing it away to some, mistress called triathlon. And you even hear about it, the triathlon, the Ironman divorce.
Yeah.
It's like, give me a break. But anyway, the whole reason for, that thing was just like how you should decide on who sees your best self, and your spouse and your kids. And for me, that's important. And so, the good for me is just having gone through that kind of awareness, to know and acknowledge when I'm not when my mind and my mentality isn't right, when my brain and my confidence is taken over, where my heart wants to go. And but to be able to be in a place where I can still compete and participate in endurance sports for good, and just knowing that, and that for me, that's the good part of it. And we've talked about this a couple times, is that triathlon and endurance sports in general can serve so many different vessels and needs within just a year span, and not to mention a lifetime. And so I think it's like the whole puzzle analogy, and for right now, it fits in a puzzle for me of wanting to prioritize it appropriately and do good with it, and not be selfish and veer towards the bad.
Yeah, that's good, man. Speaking of, just to put a quick note in there about Ironman and divorce, because you mentioned it, a friend of the blog, Brad, wrote a great guest piece on that. So if you search Crushing Iron, Ironman divorce or something like that, it should show up if you want to read it, which I think is a good way for me to lead into my next sort of bad thing, I guess, is that, in many ways, I felt like I wasn't being truthful, even though I decided to change my life, and it did spark the change in my life, and it kind of woke me up and sort of shook up the rocks. I still felt like, I don't know, early on, for my first year or 2 years, I was sort of not, it wasn't really hitting the spot, back to like what you were just saying. I didn't have a good perspective on what it meant and why I was doing it. I think I was doing it for the wrong reasons. I kind of think about this in terms of an analogy and wonder about these guys a lot, like somebody like Tony Robbins, like, who has this image of always being on, and I always wonder, it's like, man, how do they always, what a pressure that must be, because as I started my triathlon stuff and started the blog, and all of a sudden I tried to transform myself into somebody I couldn't be yet. It was going to take time, so I had to keep sucking it up and putting out this facade, and I think I got pretty good at that after a while of being honest with my blog, because I did struggle a lot. And the bad part of it was I almost felt a responsibility for being the motivated guy, the life changer guy in some ways, and I didn't like that, because I think I started from the wrong place. Like I said, it was this new venture that was going to change my life and make me whole, and it didn't even come close. It just sort of spewed me in the right direction, and I was kind of out there, battling the waves and trying to act like everything was cool, and it definitely wasn't. And I can almost say, still isn't quite there, well, it definitely isn't there yet. But that's, I guess, the bad was that I put too much weight on the power of triathlon to change me.
Yeah, that's, that'll kind of lead me into, actually, it's a great segue, man. We're on the same wavelength today.
Good.
Is the bad. And the bad for me still is expectations.
Mm-hmm.
And I say this, a lot now, and it can sound therapeutic if you want it to sound that way, and well, because it is. But I tell people all the time, expectations are just future resentments.
Yeah.
You make these goals, you make these proclamations, you make these unrealistic achievements sometimes because you feel like you have to, or you feel like the chase is better than actually reaching that goal. Because what if you, and this is a conversation I actually had with somebody in my day job who was struggling, and I asked this person, I said, what are you ever going to do if you ever reach your goal?
Yeah.
Well, I'll make another one. And I said, well, I thought, well, we all do, but at some point in your life, there are going to be no more goals to achieve. Are you going to be okay with who you are without having that? Because I think a lot of people, and this kind of goes back to the suffering part, is that, for me, I went through such a period in my life where I was so used to suffering and just surviving that for me, like right now, it's odd not to be leaning towards that. A great friend of mine was talking to me the other day, and he's like, Robbie, it's like, you don't have to just survive anymore. You don't have to be just a survivor. You can do whatever you want. You can just be happy 24/7, and that's almost uncomfortable for me.
Oh, sure. I totally get that.
It's a weird feeling, and I just think that people, and especially in endurance sports, and not just triathlon, but all endurance sports, it's a place where you can put yourself into consistent year to year, not just suffering, but dedication to just kind of flogging yourself and disappointing yourself. Because I think people are somewhat addicted, almost just as addicted to not succeeding as they are to wanting to succeed. Because I think there's a certain type of drive that people get to being or to in being in that place where I'm just trying to get to the top. I'm just trying to grind. Stop grinding. You don't have to grind. Coffee makers grind. Yeah. If you make coffee, that's good, but that's not just a good place to be. And I still struggle with it. I had a conversation with Allie early this week, just trying to find I feel like I have to do. I still feel like I have to do something extraordinary now because my life is so ordinary.
Yeah.
And not totally into the spectrum. Used to be my life was in total chaos and turmoil and whatever. And so if I did something extraordinary, I can maybe come off as ordinary. But now that that's all behind me, when life is so amazing right now, is that, I feel like, man, I don't have any, so-called obstacles to get in my way. So I should do this, but that's my mind telling me I should. My heart is telling me, enjoy it. Right now, I enjoy coaching much more than I enjoy training, and do what I love, train when I want, be purposeful when I do it, but be a good father and be a good husband. And those should come first. And when those bad thoughts creep into your mind, you've got to train because you've got to qualify and you've got to do this, that's just your mind reverting back to its old pattern of what it's used to. You don't have to do anything.
Yeah.
You just choose to be healthy, to be happy, to be a good person, to be giving, and to be a good example. Those should be the primary ones. But, the bad for me is still that thought that creeps in my mind that says, you got to be in the struggle. It's the struggle is only as real as you make it. And some people just like to be in that struggle. And, that's the bad part, I think, of the sport and just people's mindsets when it speaks to you different ways.
Yeah, we're always waiting for that other shoe to drop kind of mentality. I get in the middle of that a lot. I think it's the sufferfest mentality is definitely, like you said, flogging, masochistic tendencies that we need to hurt and we need to feel that pain. And, as I go, I have a kind of a double-edged sword with the pain concept because I do think that it fuels me in a lot of ways, and we talk about the difference between pain and injury. I think sometimes you have to push through pain to get to another level, whether it be physically or mentally. And mentally is where, this whole obsession that takes me away from my life. And I think as we get into the ugly part here, for me, I think it becomes lies. The lies that I tell to myself, most importantly, that going out and suffering and beating myself up is good and is what I need to do. And then on the backside of that, telling people that it feels good, that it's taking me in the right direction. And that kind of goes back to my last point about writing this image that we create for ourselves through doing triathlon and trying to be someone that we're not, when all along the whole goal should be trying to be ourselves. And it gets skewed because we see images and we have these desires, and I've had it all along, this whole thing about my qualify for Kona dream and everything like that, but I've been going about it the wrong way, in the sense of I'm going about it to qualify for Kona without understanding that if I do that the right way and the patient way and the way that's best for my body, mind, and soul, that then it will make sense. But if I go out there and just try to qualify it the way I've been doing it, with this kind of shortcutty, kind of like do whatever it takes, hope it all clicks on one day just for the prize, then it's going to be empty regardless. So to me, losing my way and looking for something that's going to satiate my emptiness, like a medal or a qualification, a few days of praise on social media or something like that, is the ugly part. But that wraps right around into the good part, that I'm recognizing that.
Man, have you like torn into the book I sent you, or what? You're like on page 4.
Like I say, we don't really need to read anything if we just stop and listen to our body.
Right. That's it, man. Great cover up. The ugly. I honestly don't think I have any more uglies. The one ugly I gave is really the only ugly part I see about the sport. I will say that other different ugly areas of the sport they're more, I guess, more so disappointing, are just generally making triathlon feel out of reach for the average Joe. And then it goes back to my ugly one. I'll just probably beat a dead horse here, but that really is my ugly. Bring me you're tired and hungry is not the motto of triathlon. It's bring me your egotistical, white collar, narcissistic money spenders who want you to know everything they did 24/7, and that's why nobody wants to participate, because they don't want to hang out with those people. I'm very, very fortunate to work with an amazing group of athletes who generally just like to be good people, and they like to do that first and foremost. And triathlon is part of their life, but it doesn't consume it. And I think like all these daily Strava posts that people think, like, I think that just feeds into the thief, or what is the comparison, is the thief of joy.
Yeah.
And it's like I took a run today on a snowy trail, and cold in straight up nature. And of course, I'm not going to post it or show anybody, because I feel like that would be minimizing my experience down to a number digitally recognized by strangers. And I think some of that stuff you just have to keep for yourself. And if you're not doing it for yourself, when you're doing it to show people, then that is ugly, in my opinion. Then you need to kind of take a look in the mirror and maybe re-listen to this podcast of the pitfalls that you and I have had, taking that bridge of ugliness, and where it can lead to, and ultimately either your dislike for the sport or your dislike for yourself within the sport. But there's just certain things I think that are just for you. Like for me, when I look back over my triathlon career, races aren't really at the top couple in my list. It's been experiences, either experiences with friends and family before a race or after a race or in training. It had nothing to do with setting a PR.
Well, I agree with you, man. I mean, let's face it, the races themselves can be miserable.
Yeah, I mean, they're totally. They're miserable.
It's kind of weird in a way.
It totally is, man. It totally is. But I think that's I just encourage people to find, get off Strava, get off your Garmin Connect, get off your MyFitnessPal. Do it for you for a week, and find things within it that you want to keep that are for you. Not every experience has to be shared and compared and getting likes for validation. Like the other day, like last week, I went on my long run in the morning. It was super cold and was sleeting, and I think I saw like 3 or 4 deer. I saw a coyote, which was kind of scary. But I was totally alone. And it's like, in this day and age, like, when can you do that and be totally alone? But to me, like, that's my best part of my day, is having that part. And not having to worry about, if I post it, how many people are going to have run faster on that route, or how many likes am I going to get because I ran for an hour and a half. Like, I did it because I loved it and I enjoyed it. That's why I love running so much this time of year. But I'm going off subject, but that's the ugly part for me, is people's obsession and addiction to continually comparing themselves to others, instead of accepting and appreciating and really loving where they are within the sport, their growth, and where they've come from, not just comparing themselves to where they aren't.
Yeah, and just so we make the comparison, I mean, that ugly was us at
absolutely.
A time. It's not that, but now we can look back on it and recognize it as like something ugly. I'm just going to end on a good, because I'm with you on that, running out alone. I love it when I get in a groove where I don't have to wear music when I'm running, because then you don't, you're just running for the breath and the moment. And there's something, when I get in those spaces, it's completely a different level, because music usually becomes a little bit of a crutch to kind of push me. But I've been running with music a lot more lately, just because that's also enjoyable in a different kind of way. But I've been trying to slow it way down, so I don't need the music to jack me. But when I think back to the beginning of my Ironman training, some of the most enjoyable experiences, and Jim and I were talking about this the other day, were we would do those. It was in January, so we were going to the Y together and doing like riding for an hour, doing a spin class, and then riding for another hour or so. We were doing 3 or 4 hour on spin bikes, which was just torture, and I hated every minute of it. And then we'd do a little brick, like a 20-30 minute brick after that. But then we would all go to the local breakfast place, and sit around, and that is the memory right there, man. That you cannot beat that. That's why, now I'm just throwing it out there, but that's why I get so obsessed with this, how, like, if we're all going to do a race together, it's like, hey man, you're going to stay an extra day or two, and because I know that those are the days, there's nothing better than hanging with friends and family a day or two after a race. I mean,
CC, we know you're listening, because you came out and said you're listening, so that's for you. I totally agree with you, man. Yeah, I mean, a lot of mine.
He's in the car usually before I get done with my race, heading back to North Carolina. See ya.
Yeah, no, I'm right there with you, man. And to end on a positive note, I'm the same. It's I remember doing Louisville in 2014. was a real special race for me, considering what I had gone through that previous year. And I remember we all got breakfast that next morning.
Oh man, yeah. Me,
Allie,
my brother,
my mom,
mom.
yeah, Elise, your mom. We all went to eat that like Cajun or whatever buffet or breakfast joint, and just crushed it and killed the whole buffet, and just sat back and relaxed and chatted and laughed. And I think it's a direct reflection of just how much of a release the race gives you, because it's so much bent up. But yeah, I mean, to everyone who's listened, don't take this as a you should do better. It's a don't do as we did. And I think we covered in the beginning of the podcast is, we've gone through this. This is kind of a learn from our mistakes podcast when it comes to approaching and appreciating what you do. Is take time to appreciate how far you've come in your own journey. Write it down, remember it, say where you want to go and why. The why, if you want to get somewhere, is just as important as the how. And, if you can understand that, I think you'll appreciate it more. And that's something that hopefully, if you're listening, you can kind of bypass the ugly part and the bad part that both Mike and I have gone through, and just jump straight into the good. And I do think, though, that going through that cycle of the bad and ugly does make you appreciate some of the aspects more. By no means do I think it's a prerequisite, but just appreciate yourself, what you've done, how far you've come, whether it's, just doing your first sprint, competing your first Ironman, swimming your first lap of the pool. Your journey is what you make it, and you don't really have to compare yourself to anybody else except for your effort. That's kind of where I hope this podcast, really hits people home with people, and our future podcasts as well.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think for me, it's as simple as I'm starting to learn to ask the question: is this benefiting me? Is this taking me in a direction that I want to go? Before workouts, or before I decide to do a certain race, and before I put my aspirations all over the world, I just ask, is it going to make me a better person? I try to ask that question, at least think about it, and I think I was just kind of blindly flowing along with the raging river early. And I agree with you, it's a good way. I think that it's one of those things where you just feel like holidays make you, in a bad way. A lot of people have a negative connotation about holidays, as far as like, I got it. But it's just sort of a good way to remind you that it's good to connect with your family, and it's a good thing, And that's kind of how I feel about triathlon now, and I really would like to approach it next year. As it's a good way to connect with friends and get on the same page and enhance my life. So I think I want to.
I like it, man. Yeah. That turned into more of a Dr. Phil triathlon cast than I had anticipated. But what happens when me and you get talking, man? That's kind of where it goes. Yeah. We'll be back next week post Christmas. Talk a little cycling. That's been a huge. We've had a lot of requests for some cycling talks. We're going to touch on cycling next week, and then we'll have another episode to be determined. As usual, feel free to email us, tweet us, Facebook message us, and let us know if there's anything you want us to talk about. I'll give a Christmas cookie calorie update.
Oh yeah.
So for a real one. And I think that's it, man. What else you got, Mike?
Well, that's about it. I just want to remind the first 5 people that leave us a genuine review, and yes, I will be judging whether it's genuine or not. On iTunes about this particular podcast. Here we go.
Spend 45 minutes about not judging, and you're going to end it with, I'm judging how genuine you really are.
Well, I just want you to be real, authentic. Just be if it, it's trashy, right, that's fine.
I'm logging into iTunes right now.
Okay.
I genuinely love this podcast. Size medium.
Oh, is that what it says? Or is that what you're saying?
That's what I'm saying.
Oh,
I'd like a free shirt.
Oh, and yeah. So just after you leave the review, though, remember to email us at crushingiron@gmail.com, and I will, we'll chat and get the information, and I'll personally send out the T-shirt. But and I will also do that for people who have already left reviews. So that could be as many as 8 or maybe 7, because I know whoever. But just email me and we'll do it.
Sounds good, man. Have a safe trip to Wisconsin, and tell your fam I said hello, and have a Merry Christmas.
I will. Same to you. Merry Christmas, buddy. And to everyone else out there. Thank you.
I'll do it. I'll talk to you soon. Yeah, thanks, man. See you. Bye-bye.